The reason I'm telling you this is that when you're going through a
All right,
lot
we're
of
back.
labs or follow-alongs, you'll hear the instructor say, go to the EC2 console, go to the SageMaker console, go to the RDS console. And what they're telling you is to go type the name of the service and go to that particular service's console, okay? Some AWS service consoles will act as an umbrella console containing many AWS services. So, VPC console, EC2 console, Systems Manager console, SageMaker console, CloudWatch console, these all contain multiple services. So, for EC2, you might say, okay, well, I need a security group. There's no security group console. It's under the EC2 console, okay? So just be aware of that. So now I want to show you some of the service consoles to kind of distinguish how they might vary per service, okay? So if we were to look up EC2, and we just did look at this, but the interesting thing is that some consoles, the EC2 console, is the home for other AWS services, and you just have to learn this over time to know that. So for instance, Elastic Block Store is its own service, but it's tightly linked to EC2 instances, so that's why they always have it here. Same thing with AMIs. Security groups, same thing with that. So these are interesting because these are basically part of virtual networking. And so you'd think they'd be under the VPC console, but they are actually under here with EC2. And so load balancing, auto-scaling groups tightly coupled to EC2. If we make our way over to VPC, here it's going to contain all the new stuff. Does it have a new experience? No, I guess this is the newest one. It looks a bit old and a little bit new here, but we have a lot of different things here like firewalls, VPNs, transit gateways, traffic mirroring. We make our way over to CloudWatch. Okay, and CloudWatch has very focused services. They're all actually named, and this is more like feels more like a single service where you have these very focused services where you have alarms, logs, metrics, events, insights, right? But you're going to notice that like the UI highly varies. So we had looked at CloudWatch, and then we had looked at VPC, and it looks like this. And then we looked at EC2, and it looked like that. And so there is inconsistencies because each service team, like that work on per service or whatever, they have full control over their UI. And so some of them are in different states of updating. So some people might have updated the left-hand column, but this part is old, or you might click around like under something else like EC2 dashboard, or maybe a better example might be AMIs. I remember we're in here and something looked old here. Yeah, see, these are the old buttons, and that's just how it is. So everything is very modular, and so they get updated over time. So that is the challenge that you're dealing with. You're always having like 3 different versions that are cobbled together in each UI. One thing that I found really interesting is that VPC has its own console, management console, but if you were to look up this in the SDK, so if I was to look up AWS SDK EC2, okay, I'm just looking up Ruby here as an example because that's what I know how to do. If you look under here, let's say you want to pragmatically work with VPCs, you'd think that it would have its own top-level VPC because it has in the console its own management console, but actually VPC is tightly coupled EC2, and so when you want to pragmatically use VPC, you're going to be using actually EC2 as how it was built. So the what I'm trying to get is the APIs don't one-to-one match with this kind of stuff, and so it's just kind of interesting that there's those kind of differences. But again, it's not that big of a deal. I'm just trying to say, like, keep your mind open when you're looking at this stuff, okay?
Account ID. Didn't we already do
So
account
every
ID?
AWS account has a unique account ID, and the account ID can be easily found by dropping down the current user in the global navigation. So what I'm going to do is pull up my pen tool here and just show you. It's right there. The AWS account ID is composed of 12 digits, and so it could look like this, or this, or this. The AWS account ID is used when logging in with a non-root user account, but generally a lot of people like to set their own alias because it's tiring to remember your account ID. You
Absolutely.
use it when you're creating cross-account roles, so you'd have the target account ID, the source account ID to gain access to resources in another AWS account. When you're dealing with the support cases, AWS will commonly ask you what your account ID is so they can identify the account that they want to look at. And it is generally good to keep your account ID private, as it is one of the many components used to identify an account for an attack by a malicious actor. So you don't have to be overly sensitive with it, but try to hide it when you can, when it's easy, okay?
What would be the
All right, so
follow
let's
on
talk about
here?
the account ID, which appears up here in the top right corner where you can get the account ID. It also appears in IAM. So if we go over to IAM and you look on the right-hand side, it should show you the example here. It keeps on trying to take us to the old dashboard. That's fine. But you'll notice that it's over here. And I don't have MFA turned on because I'm in my IAM user account, but it should be turned on everything. That's a given. But I just want to show you where it is and also where you might be using it. So one example where you would need to know your account ID would be something like creating a cross-account policy. So I went here and went to policy and went create policy. And we went to, maybe it's a role. I think we want a cross-account role. It's not the policy, sorry. We go here and we say, I want to access something in another AWS account. What we have to do is specify the account ID, specify the accounts that can use this role. So you give, I think, the ID of the other account. Okay. And so that is one place where we would use it. Another place would be when you're creating policies. So if I go back to policies here, I can create a policy here. And I can just choose something like S3. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just choose a list. And under the request conditions, I might specify, I think, the account ID. It should be in here. I know I can limit based on account ID. Principal account. So you could do principal account. So if I just looked up this here, AWS principal account. And you just got to get used to Googling things because that's always what's happening here. And so we should be able to specify an account ID. Yeah, like that. So that would be the principal there. So if I just took that, and it doesn't matter what it is, we just put the value in here. String equals this, add. I should be able to go over here and now see the full statement. Nope, sometimes that happens because we don't have it fully filled out. But yeah, so that's pretty much how we use it. Like it would normally show up as that. So if I just go ahead and go next, the policy contains an error. You are required to choose a resource. What do you mean?
Pick
The resource
one.
is this, right? Oh, down here. Okay, sorry.
Resource.
So we'll just say all resources. Then we flip over. Now it's valid. And so here we can see our condition saying only from this account ID that it is allowed. Other places we're going to see account IDs are in ARNs, right? So if we had an EC2 instance, we don't have one launched right now. But if I was to go ahead and, oh, maybe we have some prior ones. Yeah, so if I was to checkbox this here, and you might not have any prior ones, so there might be nothing for you to see. But if you look for the ARN, where's our ARN? Sometimes it doesn't show the ARN in the services. Sometimes it does. I wish that AWS always showed the ARN to make our lives a bit easier, but it could be because of other reasons why. But even though we don't have the ARN, I think it shows us the owner ID. And so that's the account ID number. You can tell because it's 12 digits. So hopefully that gives you kind of a tour of the account ID and what its purpose is in the account, okay? All right, let's take a look at AWS tools for PowerShell.
So using the account ID helps when setting like permissions on services or gaining access, because the alias, I guess the alias could change or be updated. Or maybe because you don't want people to kind of know which user has access to what things in case the account ID ever gets compromised. You know, it's not like they know who's got what and who do they need to target to get the password, because it's basically nameless. Mm-hmm.
So what is PowerShell? PowerShell is a task automation and configuration management framework. It is a command-like shell and a scripting language. So here it is over here. If you are a Windows user, you're used to seeing this because it has a big blue window. So unlike most shells, which accept and return text, PowerShell is built on top of the .NET Common Language Runtime, CLR, and accepts and returns the .NET objects. So AWS has a thing called the AWS Tools for PowerShell, and this lets you interact with the AWS API via PowerShell commandlets. Commandlets is a special type of command in PowerShell in the form of the capitalized verb and noun. So in this case, it'd be new hyphen S3 bucket. So, you know, we looked at the AWS CLI, and that is generally for bash, shells. And so PowerShell is just another type of shell that's very popular. And I just wanted to highlight it for those people that are, used to using Microsoft workloads or Azure workloads, that this actually exists, okay? All right, let's take a look at the PowerShell tools. I actually haven't used this one yet, so I'm kind of curious. I am on a Windows machine, so if I was to open CM or PowerShell, and you probably can't see this, but if I just bring this over here, if I type in PowerShell on my computer, you'll notice that I have it. So that's how you would launch it. It looks like a blue screen here, okay? If you're on a Mac, you're not going to have that, but that's totally fine. We don't need to have a Windows machine to use PowerShell because we can go ahead and use Cloud Shell. So make sure you're in a region that supports Cloud Shell. So I switch back to North Virginia. This is not important for the exam, but it's just kind of fun for me to go through this with you. If you just want to watch.
Look, it's
here.
a terminal
So
window.
I want to change this over to PowerShell. So I imagine that it must be over here. So how do we change to PowerShell? So we'll type in AWS AWS Cloud Shell PowerShell. Like, how do we do it? Okay, and so we're just going to scroll down here. So the following shells are pre-installed: the Bash, the PowerShell, the Z shell. You can identify them by that. Yeah, of course. To switch to new shell, enter the shell's program name in the command line prompt. Oh, wow, that's easy. So if we want PWSH, do we just type PWSH? Let's find out. Give it a moment to think. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now we're using PowerShell. And so I would think that AWS would give this pre-installed for us. So if we go over here to the instructions and we scroll on down, there's probably I don't use PowerShell a lot. It's very easy to install modules. I've done it before, but I never remember how to do it. But let's just see what we can find here. So I want the documentation for PowerShell here, and I'm going to go to maybe the reference here, because I just want to see some examples for the commandlets. And so we'll look for S3. Again, never done this before, but I'm always great at jumping into these things. And all I want to do is just list out the buckets. So I'm going to just search for the word list and just see if I can find something very simple here. And calls to get the list buckets API operation. So I think that is what we're going to be doing here. So I'm going to click into that. Okay. And then from there, what I'm going to do is just see if I can copy this command. So we will go ahead and copy this and paste it in here. And I like how we got this little shell here so we can tweak it. So we need the bucket name, but I don't want to return a list of all the buckets owned by the author. So we don't have a bucket name that we want to explicitly set here. So it's required false. So we can remove that. Okay, we'll look at the next one. Select required false. Use the select command to control the commandlet output. The default is bucket. Specifying select will result in returning all the whole buckets.
These are all required false. Look ahead. Look ahead. They're all required false.
It's not required, so let's just take that out as well. I don't think we need any of these, actually. Let's just go and put that in there. Okay. And I think that it must be something we need to put in front of that, right? Well, let's just see what happens. The term is not recognized as the name of the commandlet function script is operable. So I think we're missing something in front of here.
It's not installed. Commandlet
user guide here quickly. And we'll get to the getting started. I just want a super simple example here.
See?
Bucket, get bucket. Well, let's try this one here because they have it here. And so it should just work, right?
No, it's the commandlet is not installed.
The term new bucket is not recognized as the name of the commandlet function. So I'm guessing that the commandlet's not installed. I would have thought that they would have installed it by default. So I guess what we'll do is look at how to install it. So installing on Linux, I suppose.
Well, PowerShell
So
is
you can
not
install the modularized
Windows.
version of the PowerShell on computers. To install AWS tools on Linux, PWSH to start PowerShell core session. So I guess that's how you must start it on Linux, and then install the module this way. So yeah, I said it's easy to install these things. We'll hit enter. Cross our fingers. Hope this works. Hope this is fast.
Error.
I'm just going to take a look here, peek forward here. If you are notified the repository is untrusted, you're asked if you want to trust anyway. Just hit Y. So we're waiting for that here. You're installing this module from untrusted repository. It's funny that it's untrusted but it's by AWS. Maybe that's some kind of drama between Microsoft not letting AWS have an official module there.
Okay,
But it
it's
looks like it
installed.
should be
Do the
installed now.
get
So if
get
I type
bucket.
in get S3 buckets here, unless I typed it wrong, that still doesn't seem to be working. If I go up here and try to create a new bucket, still does not recognize the commandlet here. So there must be more going on here. If you're notified, you can now install the module for each service. Okay, well, what did we do? You're installing the modules from untrusted. If you trust it, change its installation policy value by running set policy command. Are you sure you want to install this module from the PS gallery? So I said yes, and I gave it a capital Y, and it didn't do anything else. So, oh, hold on here. So this is the installer. And then here is the actual tool that we want to install. So so we just installed this thing, and now we use this thing to install S3. Okay, great. Not hard, okay? And so we'll just say yes to all. And so that's going to install, I guess, everything. Oh, we said EC2 and S3. Well, we didn't need both, but that's fine. And so what I'm going to do is go get bucket. And so now
And there it
recognize it. It
is.
lists out the
There
items
it
here. We
is.
can go and create ourselves a new bucket. So we'll do that. Okay, we'll make our way back over the AWS Management Console. We'll go to S3, just because I don't need all these buckets lying around here. And I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these buckets here. So we'll say delete my bucket. Great. And we'll go to this one here and say delete my bucket. Excellent. All right, and so we have an idea how to use PowerShell. And so PowerShell is just really popular because of its the way you do inputs is very standardized, and the
PowerShell is trash. It's Windows' desperate attempt to keep up with Linux, just default shell. Linux shell, the fact that it had color, you can go straight into SSH. PowerShell is Windows' feeble attempt. Now, there are certain things inside Windows, excuse me, that you can only make changes using PowerShell commands. For example, Windows has taken out the ability for you to activate network card teaming, where you have two network ports and you want them to be link aggregated. There's no option, even in the Intel software, to team two NICs up. But if you go into PowerShell and you install the Intel commandlet, you can use, well, I might be eating my words here. You used to be able to still enable link aggregation using PowerShell commands.
outputs that come. So it's very popular and a very powerful scripting tool. That's our CLI tool as well. So hopefully that was interesting for you. But what we'll do is just close these off here and go back to our homepage. Always just clicking that logo there, and there we go. So Amazon resource names uniquely identify AWS resources, and ARNs are required to specify resource unambiguously across all of AWS. So the ARN has the following format variations. So there's a few different things here, but just notice here that sometimes it has a resource ID or it has a path, so with the resource type, or it could be separated by a colon. So the partition could either be AWS, China, or Gov Cloud, because this is basically the AWS portal or URL that are completely separated from each other, as we talked about those earlier in the course. Then there's the service identifier, so EC2, S3, IAM. Pretty much every service has their own service that name here that would be identified. Then the region would be pretty obvious: US East 1, CA Central 1. You'd have account ID, which would be 12 digits. The resource ID could be a name or a path. So, like for IAM users, we have user Bob. This is an EC2 instance. And most of the ARNs are accessible via the AWS Management Console. And you can usually click the ARN to copy it to your clipboard. So here it is for an S3 bucket. And notice that it's a little bit different because it is a global service, AWS. There's no reason to specify the region or the account ID or anything else there, like the resource type. So straight away, we already know it's a bucket, so we can just say my bucket. So that one's really short, but in other cases, it's really long. So here it is for a load balancer, and it has all the information there. And notice that like this has a path, this is load balancer app, my server, MLB, and then it has the ID, okay? For paths and ARNs, they can also include a wildcard asterisk, and we'll see these like with IAM policies or paths. These are really useful when you are doing policies where you have to specify an ARN and you want to say a group of things and things like that. So there you go. All right, so now let's take a look
earlier what he meant
at
by
Amazon
ARNs.
Resource Name, or also known as ARN. And so ARNs are used to reference objects. They're very commonly used when you're using the CLI or the SDK to reference to something. The easiest example is S3, right? So if we go over to S3 here and we create ourselves a new bucket. So I'll go ahead and create ourselves a new one here. We'll say my new bucket. I'm just going to put a bunch of numbers in here. It doesn't matter. We'll hit create bucket. And what we will see if we click into this is the ARN should be under properties. And there it is.
There it is.
Okay. So there are many cases where you might want to use the ARN, and a lot of times you'll just copy it. And a very common example would be, again, with IAM policies. So we go over to IAM policies, right? And I want to get to policies here to save myself some trouble. And we create a policy. You know, I might want to restrict someone to use only that bucket. So I say S3, okay? And then I'm going to say I want to be able to read and write from a particular bucket. We go drop down these resources here. And so here we have a lot of options. Maybe I'll just get rid of the read option. And I'm going to actually expand write because it's just creating too much work for me here. And I just want to have put object. That's what we use to put something into a bucket. So we expand the resource here, and notice this says add the ARN. So we go here, and we could type the bucket name. So we could do that, or we just paste it on in here at the top. So it's probably easier just to grab it sometimes. But if you don't know an ARN, a lot of times you can just expand this and then fill it in, and that's how you get an ARN. So I'll put that there. Let's list. Oh, you could also do it that way, which is easier too. And so now if I go to JSON, is it valid? There we go. So here it's saying this policy allows somebody to put an object into this particular bucket. And so that would be an example where we would use an ARN, okay? Or
there's that old JSON format, JSON object, JavaScript object all over again. You got to learn it. You got to learn JSONs. Anyone out there who's watching this? I'm not covering JSONs, but the format that you just saw, get very familiar with reading and possibly writing JSONs, because all of the cloud architecture uses some form of JSON.
Or if you're doing, if you're using AWS support, you might have to use an ARN to get help from support saying, hey, look at this particular resource exactly here. And then the cloud support engineer can help you, okay? Hey, this is Andrew Brown from Exam Pro, and we are looking at the AWS command line interface. But before we do that, we've got to define some terms. So what is a CLI? So a command line interface processes commands to a computer program in the form of lines of text. Operating system implement a command line interface in a shell, okay? So we have a terminal. So a terminal is a text-only interface, so it has input-output environment. Then you have a console. This is the physical computer to physically input information into a terminal. Then you have the shell. A shell is the command line program that users interact with to input commands. Popular shell programs are Bash, ZSH, PowerShell, and you might remember this one, MS-DOS prompt. So this has been around for obviously a very long time. So maybe this kind of primes your mind for what is a shell. And just so you know, people commonly erroneously use terminal, shell, or console to generally describe interacting with a shell. So if we say shell or console or terminal, we're just talking about the same thing, but there is technically a difference between these three things, but most people do not care, and I wouldn't worry about it too much, okay? So now let's take a look at the AWS command line interface, which allows you to programmatically interact with the AWS API via entering single or multi-line commands into a shell, and then here I say or terminal, but really it's just the shell, okay? So here is an example of one. So we're trying to describe EC2 instances, and then we're getting the output because we asked.
Okay, if you're in command line and you ever see that backslash at the end of the line, this is a way to kind of replicate indentions, or in some cases even JSON format, where you want to, it's easy to read these three flags when they're all lined up underneath each other. Otherwise, you'd have one really long line before you hit enter, where these flags and their options are all on the same line. So anytime you see that backslash, just know it's a line break that we're telling the program, hey, I'm not done giving you your set of instructions.
To have it back in this table-like view. So the AWS CLI is a Python executable program. So Python is required to install the AWS CLI. The AWS CLI can be installed on Windows, Mac, Linux, Unix. The name of the CLI program is AWS. You'll notice that up here in the top left corner. There's a lot more to this, but this is all we need for now, okay?
It's based on Python. Another big one.
Hey, this is Andrew Brown from Exam Pro, and we are taking a look at the AWS CLI, and the easiest way to get started with this is actually via the Cloud Shell. So you'll notice this little icon here in the top right corner. That is Cloud Shell, and it's going to allow us to programmatically do things without having to set up our own environments. So if I just click that there, okay, and I say do not show again, close. And by the way, if you don't see Cloud Shell here, it could be your region. So like if I go to Canada Central, it doesn't have it there. And so if I was to search Cloud Shell here, okay, it's going to say it's only supported in those regions. So that's a bit annoying, but once Cloud Shell loads, it already has our credentials loaded within our account. And so this is going to save us a lot of time in terms of, trying to get set up, with the exception that you have to wait for this environment to create. So it takes a little bit of time, but it's not that bad. And while that is waiting, what I'll do is show you actually how you would install the CLI yourself. So if we typed in AWS CLI install, all right, and we went here, the way you would install, I believe it's a Python library, but if we went to version 2 and we just said Linux, you go down here, they'll have instructions. So you just curl it, unzip it, and do that. So, if it's this, and then once it's installed, you'll have the AWS CLI commands. This is still going. So, maybe I can show you what it would be like to install the CLI by hand. So if we wanted to do that, one easy way to do this is if we just go to GitHub. Doesn't matter what repository. I'm just looking for anything here. And if I open up Gitpod, so if we go on the top here and type in gitpod.com, I think maybe that. I just want to see, whoops, maybe it's Gitpods, like that. Oh, Gitpod, you're not giving me, oh, you know what, it's .io, that's why. Okay, so if we go back here, sorry, and we type in .io, what this will do is launch me a temporary environment. And so this is outside of AWS, so I'd actually have to install the CLI. So this would be a great opportunity to show you how to install the CLI. I'm just doing it this way because Gitpod is free to use, and it's going to set up an environment and let us simulate installing the CLI. So here is the CLI here. I'm going to see if I can bump up the font. Let's make the font as large as we can go. Light or dark? Dark sounds good to me. And so if we type in AWS, and give it a moment, we can see that we have the command here. So if I say AWS S3 ls, whoops, it should be able to list things out in a bucket. So this is what's currently in the bucket. If you're wondering how do I know what these commands are, I can just type in AWS CLI commands. Okay, and if we go here and we go to the CLI reference, then we have anything we want here, right? So we go down here and I just want to see what's running in S3, and I go here and I scroll on down. It's going to show me commands like copy, move, remove, sync, MB, RB, list, right? And if you're looking for a particular command, you go down and say, okay, I'll look at ls here. and it will explain to me all the little options that we can do with it. And then it will always give me examples, right? So I can see examples like that. So if I wanted to move something into an S3 bucket, so let's say I want to create a new S3 bucket, we'll type in AWS S3 and just hit enter, and it should tell us the subcommands. Maybe if I do like help, like this. And if we scroll on down, so I guess it just pulls up documentation. I was hoping it would give us like a tiny summary. Okay, so what we can do here, because I want to create a bucket, type in like buckets.
It's never easy.
If you don't know something, you just go AWS S3 CLI create bucket. We'll go here. And then what I do is I always just go to examples here. And so here we have AWS S3 API create bucket. And I know it's unusual. There's an S3 and there's an S3 API. I don't know why that is, but it's always been that way, and I just don't question it anymore. And so here I can go ahead and create a new bucket. So I'll just go ahead and paste that command in. I do want to change it up a bit here because this name that has to be unique. So just to make sure I get what I want, I'm putting random numbers in here. We're going to choose the region as US East 1. If I wanted to do other things here, I could scroll up and look at some flags here. So it looks all fine to me. So I think I'll go back here and just hit paste. Okay, and so it created that bucket for me. If I go over to S3, and we'll wait here a moment, we can see that bucket now exists. If I wanted to place something in that bucket, what I can do is just like touch a file. So I'll just say touch. Touch is a Linux command to make just an empty file. So we'll say hello.txt. And then it would be AWS S3. It would be SP to copy it. And I'm going to give it the local path, hello.txt. And then I need to give it the bucket address. So it'd be S3 : the bucket name. So we named it this. I'm not even going to try to type that in by hand because it's too hard. And then I want to say where I want to put this file. So I'm going to say hello.txt. And if I'm right, that should work as expected. And so it says I uploaded that file. I make my way back over to S3. I refresh. There is the file. If I want to copy this file back locally, all I have to do, I'm just going to I'm going to delete the original hello.txt file, ls, to show you that there's nothing there. And what I need to do, is just revert this. So instead of saying the address here, we can go and type in hello.txt. And if I do ls, there's the file. If you don't know what the...
All right, so we're not in PowerShell anymore from the looks of it. We're back into a regular Linux environment where he's using commands like touch, copy, remove, list. And he's just showing that once you create a bucket, which is it's probably the equivalent of a Dropbox, but for all of your online applications. Any cloud-based service that you need to store user profile pictures and not necessarily database information, not secrets, not settings. But for an example, that maybe they would reference it as artifacts that are particular assets that your software solution needs to pull up to render a page or render a profile, or read a text file, right? So that's not really database specific. Maybe you keeping a running change log of things that you fixed and bugs that you fixed in your latest patch, and you want to store that in an online storage like a Dropbox or a Google Drive. That's what the S3 bucket's for. It's just an online folder. But the powerhouse of it is that S3 buckets are copied like recursively in many instances on many coasts and stuff like that. So you don't have to worry per se, but I mean, you put it in a specific region. As you can see, he created one in a region. But you can also have it where that stuff gets duplicated to other buckets. It just makes loading faster for certain applications if it's in a bucket close to the user. That's probably the best way to describe it. Um, we're gonna finish out this S3 section and then we're gonna call it. This video I did cut and come back and resume, so it's not gonna show up as a full hour. I'm gonna save my outro little speech, but we're gonna go ahead and finish up this S3 section.
The addresses of the bucket, a lot of times you can go here and find it. So it should be, because they're always changing this UI on me, but we'll go to properties here, and there, that's the ARN. Usually a good way to find it is if you go into an actual object. So if you go here, it'll give you the full URL. So I could have grabbed that, and I could have just pasted that in there. But you know, you learn after time. It's not hard to remember this S3:// the unique name. I do want to show you how to install it by hand. So here I'm in Git pods. I'm not sure how I can change this to a dark theme because I really don't like this on my eyes. We'll go down below here to color theme, and we'll say Git pod dark. There we go. And so this is a temporary workspace. So when I close it, it'll be gone. So I'll be totally fine. And so I'm going to type in AWS to see that it's not installed. We're going to go over here. This runs Linux by default. So I already know that I'm going to use Linux. We want to use version 2 here. So for the latest version, use this command. For a specific version, no, we just want the generic one. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Whoops. Yes, allow. We'll paste that in. We'll hit enter. Okay, then we'll take the next command. Paste that in, hit enter. We'll go take the next command here. We'll hit enter. You can now run AWS. So we type AWS, and there's the command. So the only thing is that if we do AWS S3 LS, it's not going to work because we don't have any credentials set. So we'll give it a moment to think. So it says unable to locate credentials. You can configure credentials by running AWS configure. So we type in AWS configure. And by the way, if this font is too small, I believe I can bump it up like this. Not a great way to do it, but it works.
And look, it's VS Code in a cloud,
and
in a
so
Docker
it says
container.
AWS access key ID. So what we can do is go over to IAM. And what I'm looking for is my particular user over here. And if you remember, when we first created our account, it generated out access key. So I go to security credentials. And so we have a key here, but I need the secret. So this key is useless to me. So I'm going to go ahead and deactivate it. Just because I don't even want this key. And I'm going to create myself a new key. So I'm going to have an access ID and secret. Whenever you generate these out, never, ever, 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 ever show anyone what these are. These are yours and yours alone.
Keys to the kingdom.
So this is Cloud Shell. We're fine. We're just going to close that for now. And I'm going to go back over to Git pods here and hit enter. So that's the ID. I'm going to go grab the secret, hit enter, paste. And I want it to go to US East 1 to save myself some trouble. You can change the output from JSON to tables. I'm going to leave it as the default here. And so now if I type AWS S3 LS, I get a list. And so if I want to grab that file there, I'm going to grab that S3 URI, and we type in AWS S3 API, or sorry, it's just LS, CP. And we're going to paste that link in, and we're going to say hello.txt. And I must have done the command wrong. It's because we're missing S3 here. I just hit up on the keyboard to get that command back. And so I type in ls for list. And I mean, I have some other code here. So, you know, again, any repo you want on GitHub, it doesn't really matter. But you'll see there is that file. Probably shouldn't use this one because it makes a bit of a mess. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. One thing to show you is where those credentials are stored. So by default, they're going to be stored in, it's going to be in a hidden directory in your root or your home directory called aws.credentials. So if I just do like ls here, you can see there's a config file and a credentials file. Cat lets me print out the contents of that file. So I go here, and it's saying the default region is US East 1. This is a toml file, even though it doesn't have a .toml on the end of it. I just know by looking at it, that's what it is. Config lets you set defaults that are going to apply to all of your credentials. And then within the credential file here is the actual credentials. So if you wanted to just set them, you could go in here and just set them in here. You can also set multiple credentials. So if I go here and I'm going to open it up in Vi because I'm not sure how to open it up here in the main one. But if you wanted multiple accounts, you would do like Exam Pro, and then you just repeat these with different keys, right? And then when you wanted to use a CLI command, actually, I'm going to go back here for a second. Okay. And if you want to, and by the way, I'm using Vi. If you never use Vim, it's a bit tricky to use. You might want to use Nano instead if you're
You're
kind of
right.
new
The
to this,
Nano way better.
because this will use like regular key cuts, and then down below it shows you what it is. So this is like Control X or Alt X,
Control
Alt
X.
X, nope,
Control
Control X.
X.
There we go. But anyway, so if I go into this file and I delete the original one, right, and now I try to do this command here, even though we already have that file, it should either hang or complain. I could just kill that by doing Control C. If I do AWS S3LS, notice that it's hanging, so unable to locate credentials because there's no default one. But if I go and I put profile and I say Exam Pro, right, it'll now use that profile. So that's the way we do it.
Through a flag to
But
tell
hopefully
it
that gives you kind of a crash
which
course
file
into the
credentials to use.
CLI. So
Okay.
yeah, there you go. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and close these off. You can delete this bucket if you don't want it. It's probably a good idea to delete this here. And I'm just going to say permanently delete. Okay. Very, very good. Okay, close that off. And yeah, that's the introduction to the CLI. So yeah, there you go.
All right, we're stopping there. Getting familiar with the CLI. The crazy thing is we're still installing those the toolkits to excuse me to use the Cloud Shell terminal shell built into the AWS console, and it's been running this whole time trying to install all the tools just so you can type in those little commandlets. I mean, at this point, you might as well just install the Python AWS and set your credentials, and then or just use the UI to create buckets and things like that. The caveat being, when you get to a level of DevOps and you need a script to enable to spin up new buckets on like a new app and stuff like that, you're gonna want to know how and what to type into your script, into your Python scripts. And those Python scripts are going to be dependent on you having your credentials set in a file somewhere. So that way you can automate, like, hey, we're running a new instance. Whenever the version number changes, whenever we go from version 3 to version 4 should have a new bucket. Another thing that you should understand about buckets, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to Google this right quick. I just want to make sure I'm not. Yes. So there's a terminology in the S3 buckets that the S3 bucket is flat. So when you're talking about hierarchy and potentially organizing files and folders, I don't think there's per se folders because it is a flat space. When you create a folder in S3, it creates a 0-byte object with a key that's set to the folder name that you provided. If you create a folder named photos in your bucket, the S3 console creates a 0-byte object with the key photos. The console creates this object to support the idea of folders. So basically, you don't jump into folders to copy stuff in there. You don't jump into folders to pull something out. It creates a 0-byte object that is named of the folder, And when you go to move something, it just basically updates the location. Doesn't physically move on the hard drive or anything like that. Um, it's what they call flat. It's a flat bucket. There's not folders within folders within folders per se, but they do let you create folders and then assign which files are supposed to be in there so that your URL strings can look like there's some type of folder structure. For those of you tuning in to the end of this, we it's a little shorter than an hour, but we had some video earlier. I'm gonna have to scrub through that video. We are following the freecodecamp.org's certified cloud practitioner video. It's a 14-hour video. We're doing 2 hours a week, 1 hour on Tuesday, 1 hour on Thursdays. We're trying to do the follow alongs in our own management console. Obviously, this video is not on Tuesday, it's on Monday because I missed last Thursday. This book here, this is kind of, following along with what the gentleman is saying in the video. We bought this on Amazon, 27 bucks. And the goal is we should finish this 14-hour online course, if not this month, by next month, doing 2 hours a week. And then we're going to attempt to take that test come May, if not before May. So far, I can tell anyone who's come to this video first, the first 2 hours of this content, this video, which is linked down below, it's not necessary at all. The stuff that he covers in the first 2 hours of this content is definitely not going to be on the exam, but it does get you familiarized with Amazon, how it started, what some of the services used to be called, and how some of the services used to be ran. I would say there's no problem jumping in at the 3 hour mark or the 2.5 hour mark and starting there if you're trying to get that there's not really a lot of hands-on before the 2 hour mark. For everyone else who's been coming for part one, part two, part three, yes, tomorrow there will be a part five. It may be an upload instead of live. So I may go ahead and record it tonight and then set it to publish to YouTube on Tuesday. I don't know, AM or PM. I'm not sure. And that's probably how we're going to do these going forward. They'll just be video uploads instead of live. We're here on part four. I've got no interaction from chat. I mean, we've had a few viewers, but I'm pretty sure I know who those viewers are. So going forward, we'll just do video uploads until we finish all 14 hours. So for those who've been here from day one, thank you. For those of you who are new, subscribe or just remember to check back on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the video uploads. I'll catch you guys tomorrow.